And when you get stressed, this hormone then causes these mast cells to release a variety of different compounds. But those compounds then cause the gut barrier that would normally be tight to be leaky.
Welcome to RumiNation, the podcast that offers practical solutions to the challenges of our industry. Hi, I'm Chris Gwynn. I'm talking today and honored to be today talking to Dr. Lance Baumgard. Lance is the Norman L. Jacobson Endowed Professor in Dairy Nutrition at Iowa State University. And he's authored or co-authored over 160 peer-reviewed papers on various topics, including milk fat synthesis, ruminant fats, interactions, heat stress, impacts on nutrition of heat stress, metabolic adaptation, and more recently spending a lot of time looking at inflammation and gut health. Dr. Baumgard was spending the week this week at the American Dairy Science annual meeting where, and congratulations, you received the Zimpro Corporation Award of Excellence in Dairy Science. So well done on all that work, Lance, to go into that. Congratulations.
Thanks, Chris. Appreciate it.
Today, we're going to dig down deeper into what I've said is the evolving concepts of gut health and ruminants. And Dr. Baumgard's an expert in that area, growing ideas and thoughts in the direction of that and how it impacts overall health of the animals and immunity, etc. So thank you again, Lance, for your time today.
Thanks for having me, Chris. I appreciate it.
Dr. Baumgard, you've been kind of leading a conversation in ruminants related to gut health and in particular in dairy cattle. And I'd love you to expand a bit more on the audience of what brought you to that area of research and developing discussions on that topic.
So when I was at the University of Arizona, we started working on heat stress. And through a series of experiments over a period of about 10 years, we whittled our way down to the gut. And essentially what we are very confident in is that most of the negative consequences of heat stress on all animals, chickens, pigs, farm animals, and humans, by the way, stem from what we generally refer to as a leaky gut. So the animal becomes heat stressed, there's a diversion of blood, and I also think there's some emotional stress connected to the gut, which we can talk about later. But ultimately, the barrier function of the gut breaks down. And now unwanted molecules, essentially antigens and pathogens, are able to get in and cause a host of all sorts of negative problems. But that's how we started at the gut, was essentially because of heat stress.
Yep. And where has it gone from there?
So once we whittled our way down to the gut during heat stress, we started to notice, just kind of almost on accident, that many of the negative consequences of heat stress, the metabolic, the endocrine, and the inflammatory responses, are very similar to other pathologies or other negative problems that are typical on farm. Transition cows, for example, transition sows, out of feed events, ketosis, hypocalcemia, all these things that we kind of thought was, it's too much of a coincidence for these to be not connected somehow. Mm. And so since then, we've looked at other on-farm, very common on-farm issues that cause leaky gut. And so that's what we've been concentrating on lately in cattle and in pigs. Yeah.
No, yeah, I've noticed that. You've done a lot of work on the swine side, and they're also a fascinating animal. So you talk about gut, and in a recent presentation did in Canada at the Animal Nutrition Conference related to the industry in Saskatoon back in May, when your gut isn't happy, you're not happy, was a quote that you've used. And so can you explain more the biology behind that? That would of interest.
Yep. So this isn't just a problem in farm animals. It's a very common problem in humans. About 1/3 of the adult population of humans has a gut barrier problem. And people like, for example, Crohn's, celiacs, colitis, these are all different pathologies, but the end result is an infiltration or too much infiltration of immune cells into the gut, ultimately leading to hyperpermeability, or in other words, more antigens leaking out, probably mostly from the large intestine or maybe some aspects of the distal small intestine into circulation and stimulate an immune response. I don't have one of these problems, but I guarantee you everyone on this watching this webinar knows someone that does. And if they talk honestly with people, right, oftentimes we don't talk about our guts very often, but it, from what I understand, is a very painful, uncomfortable situation. Bloating, and oftentimes that bloating stems from a lack of peristalsis, so the gut moves, right? It's constantly moving. You want that. That's a good sign of a healthy gut. But when the gut stops moving, it kind of becomes what's called gut stasis. And now the gas that's continuously building up in everyone's large intestine isn't able to get to the end of the GI tract, and it expands. And that expansion of the gut hurts, right? That's the discomfort associated with bloating. But also, of course, there's inflammation of the gut lining, and that hurts. So that's why I oftentimes say, if your gut's not happy, then the whole animal's not happy. And like I said, every one of us on this webinar knows someone who has chronic or at least episodic periods of having an unhealthy gut, and it just ruins your day.
Yeah. And likely ruins the day of that dairy cow that's calving or other metabolic issues going on and compounding it. So other things that I was hoping to talk about was more how stress relates to that.
Yeah.
Because I think as humans we experience sometimes when we're stressed that our gut goes off, or vice versa. And I wonder what the impact of stress or stressors and strain has in the gut health of animals, or is it vice versa, et cetera?
Yeah. That's fascinating area, emerging area, and that's led by a good friend of mine named Adam Mosier, veterinarian PhD from Michigan State University. And what he's done a fantastic job of characterizing is just simply emotional stress is connected to your gut. And I think this is another area where everyone on this webinar has some familiarity with what I'm talking about. You get stressed because you're at the job, or a big exam, or a big athletic event, whatever. And this emanates in your gut. For example, my 12-year-old son plays hockey. And before hockey games, he'll complain to me. He's like, oh, my stomach, I got butterflies, or I got knots in my tummy. And, so like I said, I think everyone's familiar with that. So how that works is when you get stressed, you release this hormone called corticotropin-releasing hormone. Well, most of your neurons are actually in your gut. It's called an enteric nervous system rather than in your skull. And they communicate with your immune cells, in particular one called a mast cell. And when you get stressed, this hormone then causes these mast cells to release a variety of different compounds. But those compounds then cause the gut barrier that would normally be tight to be leaky. Right? So what my son is feeling when he has butterflies is essentially antigens, right? Seeping through his barrier, and his immune system is recognizing it, and that's what he's feeling. Some people become so emotionally stressed they vomit, or they get diarrhea. So this is a very common, stress-related link to your immune system that emanates in your gut. And I'm becoming more and more confident then that this response, the stress response, is very common to farm animals as well. So the immune system has a very high priority for all animals, right? Arguably, it might even have a larger importance than the central nervous system. So, in other words, when an animal becomes sick, it will prioritize the immune system over almost all other functions: making of milk, making of a fetus, making of wool, making of muscle. So the animal becomes sick, infected by the gut or any other infection, and now the immune systems is numero uno when it comes to priorities. And nutrients that would otherwise have gone for the synthesis of milk or whatever function is now being partitioned towards the immune system. And it turns out, even though the immune system, the cells of the immune system are an incredibly small percentage of the overall cells of the carcass, they use an enormous amount of nutrients when they're activated by an antigen. So now, proteins and carbohydrates that would have otherwise gone for productive, economically important purposes are no longer, and they go to making milk, to making an effective immune response. And of course, this is all happening during periods of inadequate feed intake, because everyone on the webinar is familiar with being sick and losing their appetite. So that's why they lose weight. Productivity goes way down. Yeah, it's a problem for farmers.
Yeah, and this is the link where some of these subclinical immune challenges on a dairy farm, whether it's likely hoof health, higher somatic cells, mastitis, uterine infections, they're just not as productive as they could be, right?
That's exactly right, Chris. And I think this helps explain, for example, why overcrowding or pen moves or dry off or anything else that to you and I probably seems, what's the problem here? So, okay, I have, I'm 110% stocked. Why is this a problem? Well, it's probably not a problem for most of the cows, but for the small percentage of cows that aren't able to eat when they want to eat, or they're not able to lay down when they want to lay down, or they get bossed around, right? Now they're having this emotional response, and that comes at the cost of milk.
Yep, and then likely stack that on some intense heat stress like we're having today, and you multiply these stressors and things really go downhill rapidly.
Exactly.
It's fascinating how, the gut itself and what goes on at that barrier and is so important, and it intuitively should be because it's kind of absorbing all these nutrients, but I guess we often overlook it.
I think we as a field of animal and dairy scientists and veterinarians have overlooked it for probably over a century.
Yeah.
But now we're getting a better appreciation for just how important it is. And when things go wrong, she becomes a very unprofitable cow very quickly.
Yeah. So as we wind up, take-home messages for researchers, from nutritionists, veterinarians, and producers, and relates to gut health and ruminants.
Yeah. So I think we're starting to realize the gut is very important, and luckily the industry, including companies like Jefo, are trying to identify compounds and target molecules and strategies to help maintain gut health. So this is kind of at the infancy, but I think it's just a matter of time before we start dialing in on strategies to help maintain gut health, and we'll have some ideas and strategies for producers and nutritionists soon.
Yeah. Awesome. As always, Lance, it's always a joy to catch up with you and spend time chatting. So thanks for your time today on the RumiNation podcast.
Thanks, brother.
And I surely want to thank the audience for listening in. And so that you don't miss our next episode of RumiNation, you can find us at jefo.ca, as well as on Apple, Google Podcasts, and Spotify. This podcast was brought to you by Jefo Nutrition, precision for a growing world. Have a wonderful day.